Hi everyone, this is Ravi. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is our lesson 18 on TRICENTIS Tosca automation concepts. So in this session, I'm going to concentrate on modifications of templates. So let me just reiterate. In my previous session, I have explained you about how to create templates and then how can you create the test sheets and how to link the test sheets to the templates, and then how can you reinstantiate the template to generate multiple test cases based on the test data that you have provided in test sheets. So in this session, we'll concentrate. I'm going to teach you how can you modify the existing template whenever there is a change in the application. Let's assume your developer has changed an application, so that changed your test data combinations. Then what you need to do, you need not to go and change the test cases directly. Instead, you have to modify your template. And then I'm also going to teach you how can you modify the test sheets based on the application changes. And then how do we introduce a concept called verification attribute within the test sheets. So in my previous session, I have explained you about two attributes. One is basically a normal input attribute, and also I explained you about instances, correct? So in the previous session, the attribute called email, attribute called password, these two we have used to input the different values for different test cases. But in this session, I'm going to introduce about another attribute called verification attribute. So how can we use that a verification attribute in the test sheets so that you can link this verification attributes to the template. And also I'm going to teach you about Excel links. Please stay tuned. Please subscribe to the channel. Click on bell icon. You'll receive notifications whenever I publish more videos on different concepts. What is our first agenda item? So our first agenda item is verification attribute. What is verification attribute? So verification attribute has a value that Tosca uses to verify against the system under test output. So if you see on the screen, there are two attributes. The first attribute called quantity is normal attribute that we have used in our earlier session also. So in our earlier session, we have used two attributes called email and password. So which are the input to your system under test. Basically, we have validated the login functionality by using multiple inputs where I have defined an attribute of email, an attribute of password, and then I have provided three different sets of test data. So on the screen here, you can see same way a quantity is one attribute, but whereas if you see in the green color, there is another attribute called verification, which is a verification attribute. So verification attribute is a different from normal quantity attribute. Quantity attribute is, it's like input value, but verification is you are basically providing a value that Tosca can use to verify your application output. Okay, so this verification also has two different instances. In the same way, quantity also has two different instances. So that means you can provide the combination of verifications as a verification attribute in test sheets for generating the templates and for generating the multiple test cases for the given template. Okay, so when I show you, basically when I walk you through the application and when I walk you through the Tosca tool with an example, then you will understand very clearly what does a meaning of verification attribute, and then how can we use this verification attribute in test sheets. Okay, so excel links we have already saw in my previous session, where whenever you map a test sheet value to a test step value of a template, then an Excel link will be generated. Correct? So once the test sheet has been linked, we need to take care of these Excel links. That means whenever you modify the test sheets, because in this session we are concentrating on modification of the test sheets. So once you modify the test sheet, and then when you are linking these test sheet values to the template, then you have to take care of these Excel links. Why? Because if the attributes and the instances that have been named exactly the same way in both old and new test sheet, that means once you modify the test sheet, then the attribute and instances are same, then Tosca will update the links automatically. But in case if you update the template with the new attribute and instance values, then you have to delete the old attributes and instances, and you have to map the new attributes. If the name is same, then Tosca will take care automatically. Okay, so that's the reason you have to carefully check all these attributes and instances whenever you modify the test sheets. And also, when updating an existing template, it is easy to make mistakes. So that's the reason check template function must be used before you generate the test cases. That means before you instantiate the template. Okay, so before I walk you through the real-time example by using Tosca tool, I would like to tell a couple of best practices. So whenever you do any modifications, right, for the template, then you have to check the template for any references to resolve before proceeding to modify it. Why? Because this prevents any changes being made to the template feeding through to our library. Because in the template, if you are using any reusable test step blocks from a library, then if you do any modifications, right, then if you use the technique of references to resolve, then that will avoid you to make any changes to your library. Okay, that's the reason it is very important all test steps that require modification within the template need to be identified first. Once you identify the test steps that needs to be modified, then if any of them have a references to reusable test step blocks, then these references will need to be resolved. Okay, this is a very good best practice for everyone to follow. Okay, so let us walk you through the actual example and learn how can we use the theoretical part whatever I explained you regarding modification of the test sheets. Okay, so it's a practical session. It is very helpful. Just follow with me and you can do your practice as well at home. Okay, so if you see in my previous session, what we did, we have created one test sheet called login data, and where we have created three different test sets of valid users, username and password, basically valid credentials. So we have created two attributes called email, password, and then for which I have allocated three different email addresses and also three different passwords. So these are all the valid login credentials. Let's assume your application has been developed by your development team, and then they have introduced a new change where they have introduced a new change with an error messages. So whenever you enter invalid email address, it will say please enter valid email address. Let's say if you enter the invalid password, then it throws an error message. Let me tell you. if you enter an invalid password, then it will throw an error message like this. Okay, so now I would like to validate these two error messages along with the valid credentials. That means I would like to validate the invalid credentials, and then what are all the error messages they have developed, and then I want to validate the valid credentials as well, so that my test cases will be passed. So that means now this new test sheet, the old test sheet is no more valid. So that means I have to modify this test sheet so that I can validate both valid and invalid credentials. And also I can perform some validation on the error messages that you are going to get. Okay, so for that what you need to do is you have to modify the test sheet. So let me open the test sheet which I already modified. Okay, so this is my new test sheet login data including invalid credentials. So if you go here and expand this, so let me explain again. Okay, I've already explained you. I would suggest you guys to watch my previous session, which is session 17, to understand how can we add the attributes and the instances. Okay, so what I did here is I have added a new attribute called email, value email, and also I have added another attribute called value password, and then I have added instances for each attribute. For email I have added new instance, two different instances, and also for password I have added two different instances with two passwords. Correct? If you see here, for email I have added two invalid usernames, and password I have added two invalid passwords, but I don't have valid password here. Okay, for that what I would like to do is I would like to add a new instance for email attribute and add my valid username. In the same way, I would like to add another instance for password as well with a valid password. Okay, so once you enter these new instances, correct, for these two attributes, now I would like to validate. If you see test sheet level instances, so what are the test sheet level instances? These three instances. One is valid values, invalid username, invalid password. Right, the same thing you can see at the column level as well. So now I would like to select the values for the valid users. Correct, the valid user, just now I entered this, and valid password, just now I entered. That's it. So that means now we have completed modifying the test sheet. Okay, we have completed modifying the test sheet for the new scenario that I have explained you. Okay, and regarding this validation, I'm going to cover this after some time. Okay, let's finish this one. Okay, first we have completed entering email and password, that is valid email, valid password, invalid email, invalid password, on all these things. Okay, so now you need to map this new test sheet to your test cases. Correct, for that first let me go to test cases and build the test case. Okay, so if you see here, this is our folder where we have created earlier, where we have created a new template, and then we have instantiated a template to form three different test cases with valid users. So now I would like to copy this same entire folder as it is, copy, and then paste it here, and then I would like to rename this as '18 invalid and valid login. logins. Okay, so this is my new test case. And then what I would like to do is I would like to delete this template instance because we are going to map a new test sheet and then we are going to create new test cases. So that's why I would like to delete this instances. And then here in the workflow, if you see here, I have a login, correct? But I would like to introduce a new step in this particular workflow. I would like to add a new step, add a test step called login errors. Okay, I would like to add this module. Okay, I have added a new module called login errors because we are going to validate an invalid credentials also. That's the reason I would like to add this module. And then I would like to resolve the reference of post condition as well because we are going to make some changes to the post condition. Okay, as I told you earlier, if you want to make any modifications to the reusable test step block, because this is my reusable test step block which has a reference of library. So if you see the arrow mark, so that's why you need to resolve the reference here. Okay, let me resolve the reference. And once you resolve the reference, I think we are almost done. Okay, and once you complete this, let me rename this. Okay, this login error, let me rename this step as validate error messages. Okay, and then once you complete creating your template, so let me just bring this test design to the right side. Okay, and here let me just pull this. Now what we need to do is we have to map this template, the new template, to this test case, correct? So this template, sorry, we have to map this new test sheet to the new template. Okay, so let me just drag and drop. Okay, let me drag and drop to the template. So once you drag and drop to the template, now if you see the test sheet values and your these Excel links are no more valid because earlier the attribute name was email, but here the attribute name is changed. If the attribute name would have same, then I need not to remap this attributes to the template because the attribute names are changed. These are no more valid. Just delete this and delete this. And now I need to map the new attributes to the test sheet. Okay, email, password. Now we have mapped the new template, new test sheet to the template, and then we have mapped the new attributes to the existing template. Okay, so now what about the validate error messages? So for this, I have to explain you about the attributes, new attributes called, let me close this test case. Okay, let me bring this to the center so that I can show you what does this. So now what is our next agenda? We did not discuss about this validation attribute, correct? So let me explain what is that validation attribute. Okay, so here the validation. So whenever you add any attribute, okay, to the sheet, okay, so you just need to click on right click on the test sheet and then click on add, correct? So once you create any new attribute, if you would like to change this attribute as a validation attribute, all you need to do is, if you see on the top, there is a toggle business relevance, correct? you just need to click on the toggle so that it changes to a new attribute called validation attribute. And if you click on again, there is another attribute called verification attribute. And then again, if I click on this, again it comes to another attribute. Okay, that means there are three different types of attributes that we have within the test sheets, and toggle between the attributes by using toggle business relevance. Okay, so let me just delete this. So what I did is I have added a new attribute, and then I have converted that new attribute to the validation attribute by using toggle business relevance. And then I have added three new instances for this validation. What are those instances? If the valid values, if I provide the valid credentials, then my message will be success. Correct? And then if I provide invalid username, then my message is please enter a valid email address. I showed you that if I provide any invalid address, then it says please enter. See, if you see here, please enter a valid email address. The same thing I've copied and pasted here. And then if I provide a wrong password, I'm going to get this message. The same message I have pasted here, this one. Okay. So, and then I have selected a corresponding messages for the corresponding test sheet level attribute instances. Okay, valid values, I'll get a valid message. Invalid username, I'll get a invalid username. Sorry, invalid message, email message. Invalid password, and then I'm selecting invalid password message. Okay, that means these are my validations for test sheet level instances. Okay, so now let me just make this screen half and half so that it is easy for us to follow. Okay, so now I have explained you about mapping our username and password, which forms an Excel link. Correct? Now what about these validation error messages? Because in this scenario we are also validating an invalid credentials, you have to map these error messages also, these validation attributes here. How? For that, if you see here, this is wrong email. So all you need to do is select the drop down and then select inner text. In the same way, you need to select this drop down of wrong password attribute and then select inner text. And now you have to drag and drop the validation attribute here. Okay. In the same way, drag and drop validation attribute for wrong password as well. And then you have to select your action mode as verify. So let me select action mode verify. Right. And now, so now conditions comes into picture. Okay. So whenever you would like to add any condition, that means what is the condition? So if you see here, these invalid email and invalid password, this particular path only takes if the user enters invalid username and password. Correct? If the user enters invalid username password, then only these two error message comes into picture. If user enters a valid credentials, then I'll log into the system and then I would like to perform logout. Correct? So that means, that means I would like to add a condition here. What condition? I would like to add a condition, this condition. If the login is success, if the login is not success, correct? So that's why I'm going to make it as not equal to. If my attribute value is not success, then only I am instructing Tosca to validate this and this. What do I need to validate? Wrong email. What is my wrong email message that is going to come? The wrong email message is this one. And then what is the correct the wrong password message? My wrong password message is this. That means what I'm saying, I'm instructing Tosca to execute this test step only if the validation message is not equal to success. And if my value is equivalent to please enter valid email address, then I'm instructing Tosca to validate this error message. If my test sheet contains, basically if my test sheet or test sheet value comes to this level, then I'm instructing Tosca to execute this step. So these are the conditions. So this condition row, if you are not able to see this this column, right? All you need to do is just right click on here and then click on column chooser. And then here you can find any columns that you would like to add additionally. Okay, by default condition column will not be there. You have to select from column chooser. Okay, so here that is done. So then what about this logout? So logout will be executed only when my condition is success. So drag and drop here. Drag and drop to logout. Sorry, here, logout. So if the login is success, then only I'm asking to execute this logout function. Correct? Okay, I think. So let me just summarize, okay? For validation attributes, you have to add a validation attribute as same as the normal attribute, but you need to use the toggle between, basically you have to use the toggle business relevances to change the attribute as a validation attribute. Okay, once that is done, you have to set the conditions here. Okay, what I did for validating the error message test step, I have set a condition. If the validation is not equal to success, then only I am asking Tosca to enter these steps. And then within that, if the validation is related to email, then I am asking Tosca to validate this wrong email error. If the validation instance is related to password, then instructing Tosca to validate this. And then if the login is successful, if the validation instance is success, then I'm instructing Tosca to perform this logout application. Okay, I think we are done modifying everything. So now what we need to do, we have to reinstantiate the sheets. Okay, let me close this test case design and then let me save the changes. And here, so once we complete mapping all the values and once we complete mapping all the conditions, now it is next step to create instantiation. So for that, either you can right click on the template and select create instance, or select the template and then click on instantiate. So let me just click on instantiate here. And then before click on instantiate, we forgot about one thing. What is that? Check template, correct? Right click and click on check template. If says no errors found, so that means template is valid. Now I would like to instantiate the template to form multiple test cases. Okay, so now if you see, once I instantiated the template, it has created three different test cases. One is valid values, another one is invalid username, another one is invalid password. So let me expand these and then validate our workflows, whether the workflows are set up correctly based on the test conditions. Okay, if you remember, we provided test conditions, right? Let me explain clearly what are those. Okay, so I'm just expanding all the workflows so that we can see whether the test conditions are properly mapped or not. Okay, what is my first test sheet? So let me just go to the test sheet again. Okay guys, give me a minute. Test case design. So if you see under test case design, my first test data set is valid users, correct? Valid values. So for that, if you see here, for valid values, that means my first test case is valid values. So if you see here, my first test case, which is valid values, has a valid username, valid password, and then immediately it started post condition. That means it's directly going to log out. So let me minimize this valid. Now if you see invalid username, what is my next test data setup? Which is invalid username. Okay. For that, how does this instantiation created the test case? If you see, I see wrong username, I see correct password, and then if you see here, wrong email address. So that means I'm validating only email address related to wrong email address, correct? So then other one, next, let me just minimize this one. Okay, let me minimize this. What is our third one is invalid password. If you see here, now the test condition moved to your second error message. Basically it is validating the wrong password error message only in third test case. In the second test case, it was validating wrong email error message. So that means all the test conditions, whatever we mapped, are mapped correctly and the test cases are created correctly. Right? So now what you need to do is you have to just run the test case, run all these test cases and see if everything goes well. For that, what we'll do? We'll go to our template instance folder, right click, and then run in Scratchbook. So whenever I run in Scratchbook, first it should run valid values and sign out, and then second it should run invalid username and capture the error message and validate if the error message is correct or not, and then close the application and open the application again. Now this time enter the invalid password and then capture the error message related to invalid password and then close the application. Okay, so let me just right click and then run in Scratchbook. It opens the application, enters the valid email and password, login, again log out, now again open, now enter invalid email. Let's see, it is going to enter invalid email. Yes, it's entered the invalid email and then captured the error message. And it's going to enter the invalid password now. Yes, it's entered the invalid password and captured everything. So if you see here, all the test results are correct. And then I just want to see validation error message, whether they are successfully validated or not. So if you see here, which is invalid email address, if you see, my expected is please enter a valid email address, and my actual also please enter valid email address. In the same way, I would like to validate a password related one. If you see here, it has validated. Expected is login was unsuccessful. Please correct errors and try again. My actual also same. So that's the reason I see all the steps are passed. Okay. Hope you all understand the concepts of modifying the test sheets and then modifying your test step values, and then how can we introduce a validation attributes for the test sheets, correct? And then how can you remap your test sheet attributes to the templates, and then how can you generate the test template instances, and more importantly, you got to know how can we use the conditions so that it will Tosca knows what test step should be run. I mean, what test step need to be run in which conditions. Okay, hope you all understand all the concepts, very important concepts. Please do subscribe to the channel, click on bell icon so that you'll receive notifications whenever I publish more and more videos on different concepts. Thank you.